Hello summoners, and welcome back to another ProGuides video. My name is Nathan Ng, and I'm here with the 12.10 mid-patch update. We'll provide updated tier lists for all 5 roles and follow up on balance changes from the patch. Make sure you hit the subscribe button so you don't miss out on future content like this. Now let's go ahead and get started. First, we'll start off with the top laners. Ornn is being knocked down a notch to the A tier. Since games are less snowbally, most scaling champions are a lot stronger now, with Ornn's ultimate making him a strong team fighter and his passive allowing him to help allies scale even harder as the game goes on. We thought that he'd be one of the strongest picks, but for one reason or another, he's somehow doing worse than before, so down he goes. Pantheon also gets knocked down to the A tier. He's still a super strong laner, capable of bullying anybody that you end up laning against. The Pantheon has always been a champion that relies on getting an early lead, snowballing hard, and then brute forcing your way to close the game out. But the entire point of this patch was to make that harder to do now, so he's been dropped down a notch. Jorg is one of the champions that we predicted would be extremely strong, since he's generally all about longer, more extended trading, and slowing dredging down a lane to push for the win. But he's not doing better this patch. In fact, he's not even doing the same. He's surprisingly performing worse than before, so he's been moved down to the A tier, bordering on going all the way down to the B. Another really unexpected flop this patch is Riven, who we're moving down to the B tier. You'd think that extended fights would be better for her, since she has pretty low cooldowns, but I guess a lot of the hard carrying with Riven comes with the ability to nuke squishy targets with fast combos, so it makes sense. Gwen gets moved up to the B tier, unlike Riven who belongs here because she's just all around meh right now. Gwen lands in this tier due to how much of a situational pick she is. Gwen is kind of a stat check champion, so in a bad matchup, she feels useless, but in a good one, she feels obscenely powerful. We thought Kled may just feel a little bit weaker, but he's basically being gutted with his patch, becoming so weak that we have to move him down to the C tier. Tryndamere gets moved all the way down to the C tier. He relies heavily on going for those anti-fun cheesy all-ins early game to get a lead, and then using that lead to become a massive split pushing force. But since higher durability means early all-ins are a lot harder to pull off, he's just not cutting it anymore, or slashing it. For similar reasons, Yasuo moves down to the C tier. He's hopeless against the champions that make up the top lane champion pool, and the only way that you really see him work is if he snowballs super hard early on. Lastly, for this role, we have Volibear also joining the sad boys in the C tier. Now for the jungle, here's our list. Mordekaiser gets moved up to the OP tier. He was already up and rising since the buff to his passive a few patches ago, and now the durability changes have really pushed him up, making him a monster of a jungler. Tilly moves up to the S tier, and this were the high elo tier list, it'd be the OP tier. She's absolutely disgusting and very unfun to play against. She has a win rate approaching 57% in Diamond Plus, but since she's relatively a hard champion to play, she doesn't quite meet the mark for the OP tier and the mid tier elos. Even in this elo bracket, she does significantly better in plat than gold, to the point where she may be even just A tier in gold. Do note that this was made before the hotfix, so once that comes out, she may need to be knocked down a notch, hopefully. While Fiddlesticks is still performing super well in Diamond Plus games, he's actually doing worse than predicted with the new changes in the elos under them. So for this list, he's being moved down to the A tier. Rengar's being moved down to the A tier as well. This is a bit of a tricky one. He could definitely be considered S tier in upper plat, since Rengar does a lot better the higher you go in elo. But this tier list is aimed at all of plat, as well as gold, so we're placing him with that in mind. Nocturne gets demoted to the B tier. Him doing so much worse now is pretty surprising, since he's not really as burst reliant as other assassins. Really, aside from his ult letting you jump on your victims, most of his fighting patterns are a bit more bruiser-like than assassin-y, but either way, he's just not doing nearly as well as he was before this patch. Gwen mirrors her top lane placement in the jungle, being moved down to the B tier due to how strong she is as a counterpick in certain situations. She isn't nearly as matchup reliant here, since you really don't have to worry about a lane opponent. Instead, you want to use her to counter certain champions and enemy comps, specifically those that want to go for all-ins. Much like Nocturne earlier, Diana got hit a lot harder than we expected by this patch. Obviously, Diana does a huge amount of burst with her opening combo, but since she also has a huge engage tool with her ultimate, as well as good DPS in extended fights, we thought that she'd be perfectly fine. But I guess we were pretty far off, since she's doing awful enough to be dropped down to our C tier. Now here's our mid lane tier list. Cho'Gath gets moved up to the A tier. He's a super reliable laner, with good sustain and strong trading if he can land his Qs. Post 6, you're building AP. Landing your knock-up once can often be enough to go for an all-in with a surprisingly high damage. The only reason Cho can't really make it into the OP tier or S tier is that he's not a super reliable carry outside of laning phase. You can definitely impact team fights decently, but you aren't going to consistently be able to take out the backline carries. He's just too reliant on hitting his Qs, which is pretty easy to dodge, and he gets kited in fights pretty easily. While Ahri is still a super popular and high win rate pick in Diamond Plus, she's been falling off lately in the mid tiers. That's only further accentuated by this patch, since you're less likely to generate leads early on, and that's something Ahri relies on to have a big impact in the mid game, so that being said, she's moving down to the A tier. Orianna is definitely doing a lot better now since she was before this patch, but we overshot it a bit with our predictions. She's still a bit too comp and matchup dependent to make it higher than the B tier. Yasuo isn't doing too great after the changes. You really only want to pick him as a counter pick, but don't just insta-lock him when you have a good matchup in lane. Make sure he's good into the enemy comp as a whole. And better yet, you may really want to make sure that you have at least one ally that can help you set up ults in fights. Vlad's post-patch performance has been a massive surprise. Everything about the changes seem to be good for him. Games are less snowbally, so you're more likely to scale, which Vladimir is all about. And generally, as long as you don't get bursted down in fights, he can usually carry fights pretty hard. But even with all those things seemingly being in his favor, he's just doing terribly. So for now, we have no choice but to move him down to the C tier. Talon also gets dropped down to the C tier. This one was a bit easier to see coming. Talon's trademark ability is going in for those cheesy kills at level 2 or 3, and using that to snowball fast and hard. More durability means those kills are fewer and farther between. Less lane pressure also means that you have less chances to go for roams. All in all, he's just really not worth picking right now. Honestly, I say good riddance. He's been way too dominant for way too long. Just wait for somebody to bring back that bruiser build. Anyway, let's move things down to the bot lane. Twitch gets bumped down to the A tier. Initially, we thought slower paced games giving you more time to scale up would make Twitch even better, since he's a hyper carry. But you also have to keep in mind that Twitch doesn't just play like any other marksman. Big part of his identity is that he's also very assassin-like. That aspect of him is hurt pretty badly by the durability changes. It's a lot harder to go for those mid-game picks that made him so oppressive when ahead before. Yasuo gets knocked down to the B tier. Like with mid, you want to pick him as a counter pick or when your team comp can facilitate your team fighting now. For the first time in a long time, Varus is actually doing pretty okay in solo queue, so we're moving him up to the B tier. He definitely needs a lot more love to be a good pick, but at least he's more of a viable option now, especially when you need some extra engage. Jiffin gets dropped all the way down to the C tier. We probably should have predicted this one. It makes a lot of sense. More than any other ADC, Draven is entirely snowball reliant. You absolutely need to get those cash-ins in laning phase to get rolling. But as we've gone over and over again, just going for hard all-ins isn't going to be nearly as doable anymore. And even when you do get those early leads, snowballing isn't anything like it was before. You can't just take the game and run with it just because you're up 1000 gold early on. Similarly, Kalista also moves down to the C tier. She's always been a champion that struggles a little bit in solo queue, since she's really heavily balanced around how strong she is in pro play. The only way to make her to work is to snowball with her pretty hard early, and use her to force wins across the map and close the games out fast. But that's much less likely to happen now, and you're better off just abusing one of the more traditional ADCs if you want to win. Samira is our third marksman being dropped down to the C tier. She isn't actually as snowball reliant as the other two picks, but instead she's here now because of how badly these durability changes really affected her team fighting. Samira's whole thing is stacking up her passive, then going off in the middle of the enemy team with her ultimate. Once you get a reset, you pop off again and again until all of your opponents are dead. But with everybody being a lot tankier, it's a lot harder to get that first takedown that you need to roll through fights. To finish things off, we have our supports. Zilean gets promoted to the OP tier here. We predicted that champions that give utility to enable allies would be better on this patch, and Zilean is pretty much the head of that department. His one weakness is that he's pretty weak early game, but with this patch making that a less punishable flaw to have, you're more likely to reach that part of the game where you really start to shine. Soraka gets demoted down to the S tier. She's still really good, arguably being one of the strongest champions in this tier. But champions that rely strictly on providing sustain did get a little bit weaker with this patch, so she's just barely under that bar that the other champions in the OP tier set. That being said, she's also probably the best combination of strong and easy to play out of all the supports, so she's the best pick if you want to play the game on easy mode. With utility picks being so strong, we thought Bard would be insanely powerful, but the stats are showing that that's not quite the case. If you're a quirky Bard main that actually knows how to consistently make plays, maybe this doesn't apply to you, but for the majority of solo queue, the numbers show that he's just a pretty decent A tier pick. Fiddlesticks is being added to the tier list, landing in the A tier. It may sound kinda troll, but he actually fills a pretty decent niche as a support pick. While it is a bit situational in usage, his ultimate can provide good engage and counter engage, and his sphere gives a foolproof way to peel divers off your backline carries. Seraphine finally gets bumped up to the B tier. She's been underperforming super hard as a support lately. The only way that she's viable in solo queue for the better part of the past year has been either as a mid lane or bot lane carry. She just takes too long to come online, and even though the games are a little bit slower, you just really don't reach that point where you're really useful before the game goes out of control. That said, if you're just a huge Seraphine fan, you should really just swap to one of the other two roles, specifically bot lane carry if you really want to climb with her. And that about wraps things up for our 12.10 mid-patch update. Hope you guys enjoyed the video. Feel free to let me know your thoughts on where the champions fall in the tier list down in the comment section below. Also, check out our description for a link to join our Discord community. Best of luck on Summoner's Rift, everybody, and as usual, stay safe, stay healthy, and have a wonderful day. Peace.